There are some stories in the ancient world that seem to disappear beneath the weight of time. Stories that were whispered, copied by hand, hidden away, debated by scholars, and eventually passed from one generation to another. And among the most mysterious of these stories is the story of the Watchers, heavenly beings who, according to ancient Jewish tradition, came down from heaven, crossed a boundary they were never supposed to cross, and revealed knowledge to humanity that would change the world forever. But here is where the story becomes unsettling. The question is not simply, who were the fallen angels? The deeper question is, what did they teach humanity? Because according to the ancient Book of Enoch, these beings did not merely fall because they were rebellious. They descended into the human world and began revealing knowledge that humanity was apparently not ready to possess. Knowledge about warfare, metalworking, weapons, magic, astronomy, the movements of the heavens, the secrets of the earth, cosmetics and adornment, enchantments and mysterious practices. And if you have ever wondered why ancient civilizations suddenly seemed fascinated with the heavens, warfare, metallurgy, mathematics, astrology, and the hidden workings of nature, the story of the Watchers offers one of the strangest explanations ever recorded. But before we go deeper, there is something extremely important to understand. The story of the Watchers is found most famously in the ancient Jewish text known as 1 Enoch, particularly the section commonly called the Book of the Watchers. It is not the same thing as the biblical book of Genesis, and not every Christian or Jewish tradition considers 1 Enoch canonical scripture. Genesis gives us only a few mysterious verses about the sons of God, the daughters of men, and the Nephilim. Later traditions, especially 1 Enoch, expand that mysterious passage into an extraordinary story of heavenly rebellion. So tonight, we are stepping into that ancient tradition, not to pretend that every detail is historical fact, not to turn mythology into certainty, but to understand why this story survived for thousands of years and why the ideas inside it continue to fascinate people today. Imagine the ancient world before modern science, before satellites, telescopes, computers, and laboratories. Humanity looked upward at the night sky and saw an enormous mystery. The stars moved with extraordinary regularity. The moon changed shape. Seasons came and went. Planets appeared to wander across the heavens. Storms arrived without warning. Lightning split the sky. Earthquakes shook cities. Fire transformed metal. Human beings were constantly surrounded by forces they did not fully understand. And in this ancient worldview, heaven was not simply a distant physical location. Heaven represented the divine realm. Earth represented the human realm, and there were boundaries between them. The Watchers were imagined as beings who stood between these worlds. Their very name suggests their function: watchers, observers, beings assigned to watch over humanity. But according to the story, something went terribly wrong. A group of these heavenly beings looked down upon humanity and became fascinated by human women. Their desire grew into rebellion. Under the leadership of figures associated with names such as Shemihazah, they made an agreement among themselves. They would descend, they would take human wives, and they would accept the consequences together. This is one of the most fascinating parts of the story because the rebellion was not portrayed as a spontaneous mistake. It was deliberate. They knew there would be consequences. They understood that they were crossing a boundary, and yet they did it anyway. That makes the story more than a tale about temptation. It becomes a story about conscious rebellion. The Watchers descend from heaven, and their interaction with humanity produces a generation known as the Nephilim, gigantic and violent beings who become associated with the corruption and violence spreading throughout the earth. But the Watchers did something else. They taught humanity. And this is where the story becomes much deeper. According to 1 Enoch, different Watchers taught different forms of knowledge. Azazel, one of the most prominent figures in the story, is associated with teaching humans how to work with metals and create weapons. He is also connected with teaching people forms of adornment, cosmetics, and other practices. At first glance, some of these things may sound completely harmless. What is wrong with learning how to work with metal? What is wrong with learning how to use cosmetics? What is wrong with understanding the stars? But the ancient story is not necessarily arguing that knowledge itself is evil. The warning is more subtle. Knowledge becomes dangerous when human beings gain power faster than they gain wisdom. Think about that for a moment. A tool can build a house. The same tool can destroy one. Fire can cook food. Fire can also burn a city. Metal can become a plow that feeds a community. The same metal can become a sword that destroys it. Knowledge is powerful, but power without wisdom can become destructive, and perhaps this is one reason the story of the Watchers has remained so compelling. The ancient writers were wrestling with a question humanity still struggles with today. Just because we can learn something, does that mean we are ready to use it? According to the Enochic tradition, the Watchers introduced humanity to knowledge that accelerated human power, but also intensified human corruption. Weapons became more sophisticated. Violence increased. Human beings gained access to practices associated with enchantments and hidden knowledge. The heavens became objects of intense observation. People learned about the movements of celestial bodies, and suddenly humanity was not simply surviving. Humanity was gaining power. But the story suggests that something was missing. Wisdom, moral responsibility, self-control, the ability to understand the consequences of power. And that is where the Watchers' rebellion becomes more than a supernatural story. It becomes a warning about civilization itself. Every generation discovers new ways to manipulate the world. But discovering how to do something is not the same as understanding whether we should do it. The Watchers in this ancient tradition represent knowledge without proper boundaries. They reveal secrets before humanity has developed the maturity to handle them, and perhaps that is why their punishment is so severe. The heavenly beings who had descended into the human world are eventually judged. Their actions have consequences. The earth has become corrupted. Violence has spread. The Nephilim have become associated with destruction, and the cries of humanity reach heaven. The story then introduces divine judgment. The Watchers are no longer simply mysterious beings wandering among humans. They become prisoners awaiting judgment. Azazel is singled out for punishment. The fallen beings are bound and confined until the appointed time of judgment, and then comes another important part of the story. The flood. In the biblical tradition, the flood is presented as a response to the overwhelming wickedness and violence of humanity. In the expanded Enochic tradition, the story of the Watchers and the Nephilim becomes closely connected to that corruption. The flood therefore becomes more than a story about human wickedness. It becomes the consequence of a world in which heavenly beings have crossed their boundaries. Human beings have embraced destructive knowledge, and violence has spread beyond control. But there is another mystery here. Why would the Watchers teach humanity these things in the first place? Was it simply rebellion? Was it desire? Was it arrogance? Or was there something deeper? The ancient story does not give us a modern psychological explanation, but we can see several possibilities. Perhaps the Watchers wanted humanity to become more powerful. Perhaps they wanted admiration. Perhaps they wanted to satisfy their own desires. Perhaps they believed humanity deserved access to the knowledge of heaven. Or perhaps the story is warning us about a timeless human temptation, the desire to possess secrets simply because they are forbidden. There is something inside human beings that wants to open the door marked, "Do not enter." We want to know, we want to see, we want to understand. And sometimes curiosity is one of the greatest forces behind human progress. But curiosity without wisdom can also become dangerous. That idea appears again and again throughout ancient literature. And it is impossible not to notice the similarities between the story of the Watchers and other ancient stories about forbidden knowledge. Across cultures, humanity repeatedly tells stories about beings who bring knowledge from another realm. Sometimes they are gods, sometimes spirits, sometimes divine messengers, sometimes tricksters, sometimes rebellious heavenly beings. The details change, but the central question remains: what happens when humanity receives knowledge before humanity is ready for its consequences? The Watcher's story gives one answer. Power increases, human behavior changes, violence spreads, and eventually judgment arrives. But there is another detail that makes the story particularly fascinating. The Watchers were not portrayed as ignorant beings. They were heavenly beings. They knew more than humans. They possessed knowledge humanity did not have, and yet they still made a catastrophic decision. This suggests something profound. Knowledge does not automatically make someone wise. A being can possess enormous knowledge and still make terrible choices. A person can understand the universe and still fail to understand themselves. A civilization can develop incredible technology and still destroy itself through greed, hatred, or pride. And that may be one of the deepest lessons hidden inside the ancient story. The greatest danger is not knowledge. The greatest danger is knowledge separated from character. Consider the knowledge attributed to the Watchers: metalworking, weapons, astronomy, the observation of celestial signs, enchantments, cosmetics, the manipulation of natural materials. These are not random subjects. They represent different forms of human power: power over matter, power over the body, power over information, power over nature, power over other people, and once humanity learns how to control these things, civilization changes forever. The ancient writers may have understood something that remains true today. Every new form of power creates a new moral responsibility. When humanity learned to harness fire, humanity had to learn how to control it. When humanity developed weapons, humanity had to learn restraint. When humanity learned to manipulate nature, humanity had to learn responsibility. And in our own age, as technology becomes more powerful, the question becomes even more urgent. What happens when our ability to create becomes greater than our ability to control ourselves? That question is surprisingly close to the warning contained in the Watcher's tradition. Now, there is another figure we need to understand. Azazel. In the Book of Enoch, Azazel is portrayed as one of the major corrupting figures. He is associated with teaching humanity the art of metalworking and weapons, as well as other forms of knowledge connected to human appearance and behavior. The symbolism is powerful. Imagine humanity learning how to create weapons from metal. Suddenly, conflict becomes more destructive. A primitive weapon becomes a sword becomes an army becomes an empire, and an empire can turn knowledge into domination. The story therefore links technological advancement with moral responsibility, not because technology is inherently evil, but because every tool magnifies the intentions of the person holding it. A good person can use power to protect. A corrupt person can use the same power to dominate. And this is why the story of the Watchers continues to feel strangely modern. We live in an age where information is everywhere. You can learn almost anything within seconds. Human beings possess technology that ancient people could never have imagined. We can communicate across continents instantly. We can manipulate biological systems. We can create machines capable of extraordinary tasks. We can observe distant planets. We can split atoms. We can build weapons capable of destroying entire cities. And yet the oldest human problems remain: pride, greed, violence, jealousy, fear, hatred. The technology changes, human nature remains remarkably familiar, and perhaps that is why the Watchers should not simply be remembered as fallen angels. They can also be understood as a symbol of what happens when power escapes wisdom. But there is another question. Were the Watchers actually angels in the modern Christian sense? The answer is complicated. Genesis 6 does not use the term Watchers in the passage about the sons of God and daughters of men. The term Watchers becomes especially prominent in later Jewish literature, including 1 Enoch and the Book of Daniel, where heavenly Watchers appear in a different context. Over time, different religious traditions interpreted these passages in different ways. Some connected the sons of God in Genesis 6 with fallen angels. Others interpreted them differently. So when we talk about the Watchers, we are entering a long history of interpretation. And that actually makes the story more interesting, not less. Because it shows how ancient communities wrestled with mysterious passages and tried to understand what they meant. The story grew, the questions multiplied, and eventually the Watchers became central characters in one of the most fascinating pieces of ancient Jewish literature. But perhaps the most important question is this: why did God allow them to rebel? That question takes us beyond mythology and into theology. If God knew they would rebel, why were they allowed to descend? If God knew humanity would suffer, why permit the temptation? If heavenly beings possessed extraordinary knowledge, why give them the freedom to disobey? The ancient story does not provide a simple answer, but it does give us a recurring theme found throughout religious literature. Freedom has consequences. The ability to choose also means the possibility of choosing wrongly. The Watchers were not machines. They made a decision. They crossed a boundary. And they were held responsible for that decision. Humanity, meanwhile, also had responsibility. Because temptation does not eliminate choice, knowledge does not eliminate responsibility, and power does not eliminate accountability. This is perhaps where the ancient story becomes deeply human. We often blame circumstances for our decisions. We blame temptation. We blame other people. We blame society. We blame our environment. But the story of the Watchers presents a world in which beings are judged according to what they choose to do with their freedom. And that lesson extends far beyond ancient angelic traditions. It reaches directly into our lives. Every person eventually receives some form of power. Maybe it is money, maybe it is intelligence, maybe it is influence, maybe it is authority, maybe it is information, maybe it is simply the ability to affect another person's life. The question is never only, what can you do? The deeper question is, what will you do with what you have been given? That is the question the Watchers failed to answer correctly, and that is why their story became a warning. The tragedy was not simply that they possessed knowledge. The tragedy was that they possessed knowledge without obedience, power without humility, desire without restraint, freedom without responsibility. And when those things come together, destruction is never far away. There is also something haunting about the fact that the watchers were supposed to watch. They were observers. They were meant to remain in their appointed place. But instead of watching humanity from a distance, they became participants in humanity's corruption. They crossed the boundary between observer and participant. And perhaps there is another lesson here. Sometimes the greatest danger begins when we abandon our proper place because we become convinced that we deserve something more. Pride whispers that the boundary is unfair. Desire whispers that the forbidden thing will make us complete. Curiosity whispers that there can be no consequences. And eventually, a person crosses the line. The watchers cross theirs, and the ancient story says the consequences were enormous. But the story does not end with the watchers. It continues through humanity, because the knowledge they supposedly introduced did not disappear. Human civilization continued, metalworking continued, astronomical observation continued, human curiosity continued, human ambition continued, and so did the struggle between knowledge and wisdom. That may be the real mystery. Perhaps the story was never meant to tell us that learning is evil. Perhaps it was meant to teach us that wisdom must grow alongside power. Because knowledge can tell you how to build something. Wisdom asks whether you should build it. Knowledge can tell you how to win an argument. Wisdom asks whether winning is worth destroying the relationship. Knowledge can tell you how to become powerful. Wisdom asks what kind of person you will become after gaining that power. And this is where the ancient story becomes surprisingly relevant to the modern world. We are living through an age of unprecedented knowledge, but knowledge alone cannot save humanity. We need judgment. We need humility. We need responsibility. We need the ability to recognize that not every discovery automatically makes us better people. The Watchers, according to the ancient tradition, brought knowledge, but they did not bring wisdom. And perhaps that is why their story has survived. Because deep inside the mystery of the fallen angels is a warning about ourselves. The greatest threat to humanity may not always be ignorance. Sometimes it is power placed in the hands of people who have not learned how to control themselves. So when you hear the ancient story of the Watchers, do not only imagine mysterious beings descending from heaven. Imagine a warning. Imagine what happens when desire ignores boundaries. Imagine what happens when knowledge outruns wisdom. Imagine what happens when power grows faster than character. And remember the question that the story leaves behind. If you were given knowledge powerful enough to change the world, would you have the wisdom to use it responsibly? That question is thousands of years old. And somehow it still belongs to us. Because humanity is still watching the heavens, still searching for secrets, still discovering new powers, still asking questions that once seemed impossible. And perhaps the greatest lesson of the Watchers is not to stop seeking knowledge. It is to become wise enough to carry it. Because knowledge can open doors. But only wisdom can tell you which doors should remain closed. And that may be the true mystery behind the Watchers, not simply why they fell, but what their fall was trying to teach humanity about the dangerous distance between knowing something and being ready for what you know.